Miquess, hello friend. My name is Larry Cesspooch. I'm the Ute Indian Tribe Public Relations Director and producer for this video. This video was produced to help you understand picture writing better. The Uintah Ouray Ute Reservation is situated in northeastern Utah. The name Utah comes from the Spanish, who call the Utes Utahs. The Spanish were the first into Ute country in 1600. What you're about to experience is more than drawings on the rocks. The images have spiritual qualities. I'd like to share an experience we had videotaping this production. The night before we were to shoot, we charged our batteries as usual. The next morning we went out to our first panel and set up to shoot. Our batteries were dead. We couldn't figure out what was wrong. So we broke for lunch to look at our batteries. We got talking about the old people, the old storytellers who told their story on the rocks. We figured that they were like we were, that all of us are blessed with gifts to be able to tell stories. But the way they told their stories was on the rocks. The way we tell our stories is through the video. And got thinking that they prayed over their work just as we do ours. So I took an offering of food for my lunch and went out to talk to the old storytellers. I told them I would help others to understand their message, their stories. And I believe that's why I'm here today, to help you to understand because of what I told them. Utes have a tradition of rock writing that goes way back, centuries. It's evidenced throughout Utah and Colorado. The Ute panels you're about to see, like this one, is the first time that they've been interpreted. They've been interpreted by LaVan Martineu, author for When the Rocks Begin to Speak. Martineu's theory is that the rock writing comes from the sign language, and the Utes have been fluent in sign language for many years. It was the universal way all tribes spoke to one another, and then that moved to the rocks.
I first became interested in studying Indian rock writings back in 1949. That's when I first made my first sketch of writings. And it was about 1956 that I started working on them in earnest. I've kind of been at it now for about 30 years. It's become a full-time profession. When I was younger, my father and mother were both alcoholics, and they died. And I was raised by some full-blood Paiutes in my younger days. And I grew up speaking Paiute. And I remember I first came up to the White Rock Ute area about 1949 or 1950 with some old Indians from St. George, Walter George and Foster Charles. And we'd always camp at Happy Jack's place. And I remember him telling me a lot of things about the Utes. In fact, it was up here that I learned the sign language. And many of the older people told me that the Utes had picture writing. They wrote many of their battles and many of their stories, as you see here. They have the same concepts about them the Paiutes do. Many were written by the Utes, some by invading tribes, and some by the Moochew or Hopi, who lived here prior to them at that time. When I was in the service, I got exposed to the science of cryptanalysis. That's deciphering codes. And that's the science that all your forgotten languages, that's the science that you use to decipher these forgotten languages. And I have applied that to Indian picture writing. What I try to do is to prove one symbol to have the same meaning over and over and over before I accept any of my guesswork. And that's my process. As you'll see throughout this film, several of the symbols that we show will be shown several different times with the same meaning. And once you prove a symbol to have the same meaning hundreds of times, there's no way you can be wrong. But if you just prove it to have the same meaning once or twice, and you know you're just guessing. The Ute people have lots of picture writing, and they still was a very strong people in the use of the sign language in the 50s and 60s. There's still Utes today that know the sign language. And in the sign language, I have been able to go to Canada and talk to the Sarcees, go to Browning, Montana and talk to the Blackfeet, go to Oklahoma and talk to the Indians there, or the Sioux in South Dakota, using the same sign language that I've used with the Utes, and they're able to understand me.
Ed Wyaskett is a member of the Uncompahgre Utes. Ed can still do the sign language and talks about how things were in Colorado and how the Utes came to be known as the Uncompahgre Utes, or the Red Lake Utes.
Noochew. 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 Oh, live down in Colorado.
As more and more non-Indians came into Ute country, they began to settle in the best hunting grounds. The Utes had their horses and were known for hunting and fishing.
This panel represents the time when the Utes still lived in Colorado, in the Rocky Mountains. They were noted by the Plains Indians as really mountain Indians. It's one of the ways they referred to the Utes, alongside the symbol for black. You notice this rock incorporation where these horses are situated up high. This shows a buffalo that used to roam up into the parks in the Colorado Rockies. There used to be buffalo there. These are symbols of deer that the Utes used to live on. Over here you'll find the symbol of a woman carrying a baby on her back. And the line across her stomach is one of the ways you can say hungry. You're cut in two in the sign language. The reason they're hungry is because down here on the plains, which is indicated by these buffalo being positioned lower, the plains were lower than the Rockies. You see many buffalo down there, and you see the Indians hunting the buffalo. But along comes the white man, and he dismounts from his horse and runs over here, and he's shooting the buffalo. And pretty soon the buffalo, they became all gone, and the Indians became hungry. They no longer was able to maintain their old way of life. So at this time, you see the Indian beginning to follow the white man's way. Here he has a hat on with his feather to show that he's following the white man's way. And here he's offering the pipe. He's offering peace. Now this is exactly what happened up on the White River Reservation when Meeker came in and became agent. The White River Utes offered peace and allowed the white men to come in and set up a reservation. And here again you have the symbol that might possibly represent the name for the Imparacuts, the wild carrot people, or the White River Utes. After a while they became disillusioned with the white man's Indian agent and reservation life, and that's what caused the Meeker massacre, the White River Uprising.
Because of the Meeker incident, the White River Utes and Uncompahgre Utes were escorted to the Uintah Ouray Ute Reservation in Utah in 1880s.
Here you see the Utes again depicted as horses. This panel tells what happened after the battle. The Indians are separating. They're going their ways. This horse here has a water symbol on it, which represents the Red Lake Utes, or the Uncompahgres. It's positioned like a brand because that denotes ownership or identity, as brands do. It's something they learned from the white man to put that symbol there. This is probably the symbol for the Imparacuts, or the White River Utes, which were known as the wild carrot eaters. You see this plant in the position of a brand, and here you even see a round bulb that you find at the bottom of these wild carrots. So this represents the Indians breaking up and dispersing after the talks and after the battle.
With the Utes being moved to the Uintah Ouray Ute Reservation, they felt out of place. They were exiles in their own land. They were being forced to go to school, being forced to live within barbed wire fences, and cattle was something that they hadn't seen.
This panel here shows two Indians. And one Indian is dwelling up higher because there's a ridge right here indicating he's much higher than this particular Indian down lower in a lower area. This represents the Uintah Utes who came to the Uintah Reservation before the Uncompahgre Indians. In fact, there was a Uintah band here back in prehistoric times even. So the Uncompahgre Ute has his hand up reaching for the pipe. In other words, they are talking and they're becoming friends because the Uncompahgres are going to settle out in the lower desert area of Hill Creek and Willow Creek, where they were settled in 1880. So this represents that meeting between the Uncompahgres and the Uintahs when they made friends, because this was originally Uintah land. You notice the hands right here kind of rubbed over, which probably would be another way of showing the Ute sign. After this settlement here, you see the Utes again depicted as prisoners. They're using a horse to depict the Utes. And he is hobbled. He has his hands tied, the legs tied. He no longer can go where he pleases because there's a white man watching over him. Here again we have the hat without feathers, indicating he is a white man. That would be the Indian agent watching over them. While they were settled here, they were required to do many things. One thing they were taught was the art of cattle raising. That's why you have a cow with a brand put on it. Here you have a man driving horses, again representing the Utes. This particular horse here has got black on it. And again, as I've mentioned before, that represents the sign for the Utes. They were noted as having black, being darker than the rest of the Indians. And black in hair was the way, or color in hair is the way you say that in the sign language. This mounted horseman is in the act of herding. He is herding these horses and a deer. You know, you don't herd horses and deer together. He's herding them in this direction. And you'll see that they're coming to a school, to a building. Right here you have two humans shown, and they're coming up against a cliff. In the sign language, when you say run against, you go like this. That means you come to something. Well, that cliff represents like a fence or a cliff, where when you drive wild animals, the cliffs act as barriers to direct them. In other words, the rider is directing them, forcing them to go into this building. Now inside this building you see the Indians with their blanket strips, their white man's hat, and their feathers. And this Indian here shows what is inside of his head. He is still thinking like an Indian because the Indian ways are within his head. But right here you'll see a sign going into his ear, and that's a sign for speak. You go like this with your finger, and if you're hearing something or being told something or being taught something, you speak into a person's ear. So that means he is learning. He's learning new ways. Just above it, you see another way of saying that. You see a mouth coming into the roof of the building, and that means words being spoken, being put into the roof or the top of your head, so to speak. That identifies this as a school in the old Indian way of denoting things. Here again they use a horse representing the teacher because they can show his face and profile and show his mouth going in better than you could by just using a round head. So again, this shows the versatility of horses and sheep and saying many things in the Ute picture writing.
The rock writing talk about a lot of different stories. One of the stories is about the Shoshones and the Utes. In the image, the Utes are signified by blanket strips. Was a very noticeable thing, recognizable thing for Utes and their blanket strips. In the Shoshones, in the sign language, they were shown as a snake. And the story talks about the Shoshones and the Utes and the relations that they had.
You'll see a line of women, and they're wearing their shawls. One even has what appears to be a blanket strip. And across the line of women is a coiled serpent. And you can see his eyes and his mouth and his forked tongue there. Above it you see another serpent, a rattlesnake, with a forked tongue, And on top of the rattlesnake is a little coiled serpent which represents a baby. So what we're talking about here is the Shoshone people. The snake in the sign language represents the Shoshone people. So we have a panel depicting Ute man intermarrying with the Shoshone people and a child being born. Children are always depicted as being carried because when the Indians had babies, they always carried them on their back. That's why you see a baby snake on the back of the mama snake.
As you can see, picture writing is a Ute tradition. As I told the old storytellers when I prayed before, that I would help others to understand is the reason that I feel we are here today and you're here. This exhibit is all part of a time that the rocks are to speak. As you can tell from our experience, what you will see is more than drawings on the rocks. It is visions, reality of those who were before us.